Dan, if you've been here this week and you gave the John F. Kennedy Memorial Lecture the other night, and you spoke of your own experiences and your thoughts around leadership and John F. Kennedy. Could you first of all explain to me about the first time that you met John F. Kennedy and what your initial reaction was to the man?
Yeah, sure. It was in 1949, and he'd been a congressman for a couple of years, and we had a radio show, the organization, which I then headed in Boston, and we had Congressman Kennedy on the show, and I just met him very briefly, didn't have any particular impression. Next time was 1954 at the Democratic State Convention. It was an interesting moment because he'd been senator for a couple of years. He got elected to the Senate in 1952, and this was the Democratic Party in Massachusetts getting together, and he was booed at his own convention. The reason why I mention it is because that convention was made up of kind of knee-jerk liberals, and they didn't like him because of the way he'd handled the McCarthy censure, Senator Joe McCarthy, a communist hunter, so-called, and his father, whom they didn't like. And it was the other group at that convention were the old line Democratic city and town politicians, and they didn't like him because during his Senate campaign, he'd pushed them aside and developed his own organization, Kennedy Secretaries. So I thought that was kind of curious. And then I saw him, just before he went to the hospital for the back operation. He was involved in a television show, endorsement show. But I saw him during the mid to late 50s, worked on various projects. I remember Harvard Yard, the Harvard commencement, about a month before he went to Los Angeles to get the presidential nomination. And we just crossed in the yard. He had his top hat and tails on because he was an overseer. But he had he was about to be nominated for president of the United States. They had nobody with him, no entourage, no Secret Service, no aides or anything, just the two of us crossed. And he said, "Oh, Dan, you were in Wisconsin for that primary last winter." And I said, "Yeah, Jack." He called him Jack until he became president. Then you never called him anything but Mr. President. I said, "Yeah, Jack, boy, it was a long way between people out there." And he laughed and he said, "Yeah, they're not that friendly when you meet them either." And so it was that kind of acquaintance.
And then the next time you saw him was in the White House itself, was it?
So I'm just little odds and ends, of time. As best I can figure out what happened while I was taking care of his old office, Boston office, then occupied by his successor in the Senate, Ben Smith. That was Senator Smith's special assistant. And then, as best I can tell, what happened was he said to Kenneth O'Donnell, his appointment secretary, what we need in the White House is a permanent talent search to find people for presidential appointments. He called them executive personnel, the people appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. And Kenny said, "What about Dan?" And he said, "Fine." So that's why I went down there in, I guess, mid-June of '61. And then as far as the White House is concerned, there were only 25 people, unlike the sort of 1,500 you have now, and however many number. So you'd see him around the office, the way you'd see any boss around the office.
Did you see that sort of streak of ambition or streak in Jack Kennedy that he was destined to become president?
Well, there are so many people who that PT boat must have been the size of an aircraft carrier, the number of people who were on the PT boat with him. And he must have had a Harvard suite of rooms as big as the Stormont Hotel, a number of people who were his roommates. And by the same token, the number of people who said the minute I met him, I knew he was going to be president. I don't put much stock in that. He was obviously very able, very focused, very successful, very wise politically, very pragmatic, and very focused. You know, it happened to me, but it happened to a lot of people. He would ask penetrating questions about things where they had some expertise. He'd listen very intensely to those answers. He was always absorbing information and containing it too.
Lots of people are making lots of assumptions about Ireland and Kennedy and what it actually meant to him. But are those wrong to assume that it did mean an awful lot to him and his family?
Oh, I think so. Not the land of my birth, but the land for which I have the highest degree of affection, or something like that. He said when he was here, and you can see it in the videos of his visit. And as I recall, Ken O'Donnell said to him when they were planning the trip, he said, you know, Mr. President, there's no foreign policy reason, national security reason for you to go to Ireland. I mean, people will just say you want to go for a little vacation and for the fun of it. And he said, that's right, and I'm going. He cherished that visit, and you could, as I say, you can see in the movies and videotapes of whatever they were at the time, how much he was enjoying himself.